Samuel was the last judge in the period of Judges. Basically, he was characterized by having to live in a very changing world. A change from a period of judges to the change of a king, and not a good king. And then he would wind up anointing another man who would become king, but Samuel would die before that takes place. It was a time of change, for his own sons were not following in his steps. The people demanded a king. He sought God's answer, and God said, "They've not rejected you, Samuel, they've rejected me." And God then had a man who was taller by head and shoulders than anyone else to be appointed as king by Samuel. His name was Saul. I show Saul here catching hold of Samuel's cloak, begging him to come back and bless him. Samuel's cloak tears. And because of Saul's wickedness, God has Samuel to tell Saul, "I'm going to tear the kingdom from your hand. Had you walked with me, it would have stayed in your lineage. But you have not walked with me. But I am looking for a man who will be after my own heart." And that man turned out to be King David. David was a man after God's own heart, and yet there were two occasions in David's life that we have record of. These are not the only sins David ever committed, but they were the ones that had a serious effect upon the children of Israel. He started off under Saul as his armor bearer. There was a saying, Saul has killed his thousands, David his 10,000. So David is actually rising to power under the reign of King Saul. He refused to kill King Saul on 2 occasions, although King Saul had sought to kill him on numerous occasions. He was crowned after the death of Saul. He was able to bring the Ark of the Covenant back to the city of Jerusalem. And of course, we're familiar with the crime of adultery and murder concerning Bathsheba and Uriah the Hittite. Incidentally, Uriah was one of his 30 trusted super warriors. So he was known to David. David knew him personally. And it's very possible David even knew his family personally. One thing about David is when God punished him, he accepted the punishment without passing the fault onto someone else. Exactly what Saul had done. As a result of his sin, the little baby born to his adulterous connection died. His oldest son, Amnon, committed adultery or incest with his sister, half-sister. Absalom, her brother, killed Amnon. So David's firstborn died as a result of David's sin. Absalom wound up trying to take over the kingship. Absalom was killed. During the last hours of David's life, even though David wanted Solomon to become the next king, the next son of his, Adonijah, was attempting to take over the throne, and Adonijah was killed. For part of the punishment that God gave to David was the fact that the sword would never leave his house. I think encapsulated within that same warning was the fact that God was not going to let David build the temple. David, however, did collect gold and silver and bronze and lumber and materials to build the temple, and that material then would fall to the next man in line, David's son by Bathsheba, Solomon. 1 Chronicles chapter 28, verses 5 through 7. Of all my sons for the Lord has given me many sons. He has chosen my son Solomon to sit on the throne of the kingdom of the Lord over Israel. He said to me, your son Solomon is the one who will build my house and my courts. For I have chosen him to be a son to me, and I will be a father to him. I will establish his kingdom forever, if he resolutely performs my commandments and my ordinances, as is done now. What I just read to you is going to be part of the answer to the title of today's sermon, The Sophomore King. The Sophomore King. Here's another passage, 1 Chronicles chapter 28, verse 9. As for you, my son Solomon, know the God of your father, and serve him with a whole heart and a willing mind, for the Lord searches all hearts and understands every intent of the thoughts. If you seek him, he will let you find him, but if you forsake him, he will reject you forever. I think most of us think of Solomon and wisdom connected together. In 1 Chronicles chapter 29 and verse 25, the Lord highly exalted Solomon in the sight of all Israel, and bestowed on him royal majesty, which had not been on any king before him in Israel. And then there's a rather lengthy description of what happens shortly after this. God asked Solomon, what could I give you? Give me now wisdom and knowledge, that I may go out and come in before this people. For who can judge this great people of yours? And God said to Solomon, because you had this in mind, and did not ask for riches, wealth, or honor, or the life of those who hate you, nor have you even asked for a long life, but you have asked for yourself wisdom and knowledge, that you may rule my people over whom I have made you king. Wisdom and knowledge has been granted to you, and I will give you riches and wealth and honor, such as none of the kings who were before you has possessed, nor those who will come after you. Do you remember that Jesus said in the New Testament concerning the flowers of the field, that not even Solomon in all of his glory was arrayed like one of these? So even Solomon is referred to by Jesus himself as being one who had great, great glory in the eyes of men. One of his greatest accomplishments was the building of the temple. He also built a palace for himself, and he built other houses, palaces also. We'll get to those in a few moments. Thus all the work that Solomon performed for the house of the Lord was finished. And Solomon brought in the things that David his father dedicated, even the silver and the gold and all the utensils, and put them in the treasuries of the house of God. I want you to listen to what happened next. When the priests came forth from the holy place, for all the priests who were present had sanctified themselves with regard to divisions, and all of the Levitical singers, Asaph, Heman, Jeduthun, and their sons and kinsmen, clothed in fine linen, with cymbals, harps, and lyres, standing east of the altar, and with them 120 priests blowing trumpets. In unison with the trumpets and the singers were to make themselves heard with one voice to praise and glorify the Lord. And when they had lifted up their voice, accompanied by trumpets and cymbals and instruments of music, and when they praised the Lord, saying, He indeed is good, for his loving kindness in everlasting. Then the house of the Lord was filled with a cloud, so that the priests could not stand to minister because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. I read this particular section of Scripture for two reasons. One is this building was the center of the religious world of Israel. This building was the center of power in the kingdom of Israel. They were a religio-political group of people. Religion and politics were combined. You saw it in the period of the judges. You're going to see it in the period of the kings. You're going to see how this creates a problem in the kingdom after it's divided among the people of Israel and to a great degree even among the people of Judah. The second reason I brought it to your attention was instruments of music were used in this occasion in the Old Testament. David did play a musical instrument, but nowhere in the New Testament do we find anything authorized in our worship except singing, making melody with our heart. So we don't bring in the instruments of music from the Old Testament, even though they were there. We do not bring in the Old Testament priesthood, even though they were there. We do not bring in from the Old Testament a sacred building, even though it was there. We follow the New Testament as our guide. But on this day, because of the religious and the political relationship that worked hand in hand in Israel, this was a national celebration, not just having to do with religion. I want you to listen to what Solomon said in chapter 6, verses 16 and 17. Now therefore, O Lord, the God of Israel, keep with your servant David, my father, which you have promised him, saying, you shall not lack a man to sit on the throne of Israel, if only your sons, listen, take heed to their way, to walk in my law as you have walked before me. Now therefore, O Lord, the God of Israel, let your word be confirmed which you have spoken to your prophet David. This is Solomon that same day making a commitment to God to walk in his ways like David did. And here is God's response to what Solomon said. As for you, walk before me as your father David walked, even to do according to all that I've commanded you, and will keep my statutes and my ordinances. Then I will establish your royal throne as I covenanted with your father David, saying, you shall not lack a man to be ruler in Israel. But if you turn away and forsake my statutes and my commandments which I've set before you, and go and serve other gods and worship them, then I will uproot you from the land which I have given you, and this house which I have consecrated for my name, I will cast out of my sight, and I will make it a proverb and a byword among all people. Do you hear what Solomon promised and what God promised? God promised, you walk in my statutes, I will keep your descendants on the throne. You do not walk in my statutes, I will uproot your people from the throne. But oh, his wisdom. I want to share with you this passage. Now God gave wisdom and very great discernment and breadth of mind, like the sand is on the seashore. Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the sons of the east and all the wisdom of Egypt. For he was wiser than all men, than Ethan the Ezrahite, Heman, Kolol, and Darda, the sons of Mahol, and his fame was known to all the surrounding nations. He also spoke 3,000 proverbs. His songs were 1,005. He spoke of trees, from the cedar that is in Lebanon, even to the hyssop that grows on the wall. Did you know he was a botanist? He also spoke of animals and birds and creeping things and fish. Do you hear how knowledgeable this man was? Biology, zoology, ichthyology, isn't that fish? Several other ologies that I don't even know the name for. People who want these kinds of things, and here his wisdom came to him. He was amazing. But he was foolish. Now King Solomon loved foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women, from the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the sons of Israel, "You shall not associate with them, nor shall they associate with you, for they will surely turn your heart away after their gods." Solomon held fast to these in love. He had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. And his wives turned his heart away. 1 Kings 11, 4 through 8. For when Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart away after other gods, and his heart was not wholly devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. For Solomon went after Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the detestable god of the Ammonites. Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not follow the Lord fully, as David his father had done. Then Solomon built a high place for Shemoth, the detestable idol of Moab, on the mountain east of Jerusalem, and for Molech, the detestable idol of the sons of Ammon. Thus also he did for all his foreign wives, who burned incense and sacrificed to their gods. And God keeps his word. The Lord said to Solomon, "Because you have done this, and you have not kept my covenant and my statutes which I commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you and will give it to your servant. Nevertheless, I will not do it in your days for the sake of your father David." The only reason that Solomon got to finish out his rule was because of God's love for David. I will not do it in your days for the sake of your father David, but I will tear it out of the hand of your son. We need to remember that God had promised to David that his descendants could be on the throne. And so one of Solomon's sons is going to get to have two of the tribes of Israel, and one of Solomon's servant, an Egyptian, is going to get 10 of the tribes which are going to be called Israel. The two tribes that are going to his son, Rehoboam, are Judah and Benjamin. And so the bulk of Israel was taken out of Solomon's descendants' hands, where it could have gone had Solomon lived up to the wisdom God had given him. But he didn't. Here's a reflection of his attitude. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verses 1 through 8. He writes in the book of Ecclesiastes, "Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near when you say, I have no delight in them." Do you hear where he is? As he has turned to idol worship, this is his life. It is his days when he has no delight in them. Before the sun and the light, the moon and the stars are darkened, and the clouds return after the rain. The day when the watchmen of the house tremble and mighty men stoop. He's talking about the trembling of an old man and the bending over of an old man. The grinding ones sit idle. Teeth are gone because they are few, and those who look through the windows are dim. He can't see very well anymore. The doors of the street are shut, and the sound of the grinding is low, and one will rise at the sound of a bird, and all the daughters of song will sing softly. Life is meaningless. Furthermore, men are afraid of high places and of terrors on the road. The almond tree blossoms, the hair grows white. The grasshopper drags himself along, and the carper-berry is ineffective. For man goes to his eternal home while mourners go about the street. Remember him before the silver cord is broken and the golden bowl is crushed, and the pitcher at the well is shattered, and the wheel at the cistern is crushed. Death. Then dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. I want you to listen to how he winds up what he has just said. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. All is vanity. So what's really left, Solomon? Do you have any wise words at all for us at the end of the book of Ecclesiastes? And he does. It does not describe his life, but it does describe what is right. The conclusion, when all has been heard, is fear God and keep his commandments, because this applies to every person. I like the way the King James puts it, but leave out a word that the translator supplies. The actual Hebrew words say here, for this is the whole of man. The word duty is inserted. It's not in the original text. This is the whole of man. This is not just his duty. This is what man is all about. But how did Solomon describe the bulk of his life? Vanity of vanities. In the book of Ecclesiastes, he writes, I tried this pleasure, I tried that pleasure, I tried that pleasure, I've tried it all. And all I can say after I've used all of my wisdom to try all that the world offers, it's vanity of vanities. Fear God and keep his commandments, because this applies to every person. Because God will bring every act to judgment. Everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil. Why do I call him the sophomore king? Sophomore. That word is made up of two Greek words. The word Sophia means wisdom. If you know someone named Sophia, then you know someone whose name means wisdom. But the word sophomore has a second word in it, and that is the Greek word moros, from which we get our word moron, or fool. So what does the word sophomore mean? It means a wise fool. If we're talking about a sophomore in high school, that's actually a compliment, because it means they're moving on the way to wisdom, but they still have a little foolishness that they need to be taught out of. They're supposed to grow beyond this. So this is supposed to mark a time of growth, a time of learning more wise ways and leaving foolish ways behind. And it worked exactly the opposite in this man's life. Solomon started off with wisdom. He started off making a commitment to God to walk in the ways of God as his father David did. He started off by building a temple, elaborate, one of the most elaborate buildings ever in the country of Israel. And yet, when he commended himself to God that he would keep his word, God gave him a warning at that time. You keep my word, you will be blessed. But if you start going after other gods, which he did, do you know what he actually did? He actually became politically correct. That's what he actually did. You want to worship the Ammonite god? Good, have at it. I do that too. You want to worship the Moabite god? Good, I'll do that too. You want to worship Molech? I'll worship Molech. You want to worship the stars? I'll worship the stars with you. He became politically correct. Many people believe that many of his 700 wives he never even saw once, maybe twice, but not once. Or maybe I should say once, but maybe not twice. They were political. I would like for you to have my daughter, and we will make a treaty. So let's do that. Let's make a treaty with your country. I'll take your daughter. I'll give her a good place to live. I'll take good care of her. Now you're on my side. Let's gather the people in any way we can. Political correctness could very well be the word used instead of sophomore. But I've chosen the word sophomore because in the eyes of God, he started off wise and he wound up a fool. And if there is any place we do not want to be viewed as a fool, it's in the eyes of our God. Let us learn from this man. Let us understand that he had so much wisdom, but it was dealing with politics and people. It wasn't his dealings with God. We know people today who are wise at dealing with people. I know some of the most effective counselors are people who will just say, well, whatever makes you happy, that's how I want to counsel you. If it's living with somebody not married, then I'll counsel you how to be happy doing that. If it's changing your gender, I want to counsel you how to be happy about doing that. If it's worshiping this God, I want to counsel you how to be happy doing that. Political correctness and holiness are not brothers and sisters. They are enemies, one of another. So much wisdom in dealing with people, and yet so much foolishness in dealing with God. As a Christian, let me just give you a quick thought here. I know in high school, I went through the freshman year. It was great to be out of, quote, junior high and to be a part of the high school group. And then sort of the fun got lost my sophomore year because it really wasn't so fresh anymore. And then there was the junior year. I still had a year to go. And then there was a senior year, and that was good. And then graduate school. Are you stuck as a Christian somewhere along this road? Are you stuck? You see, a lot of people would be happy stopping their freshman year in high school. And a lot of them do. They drop out. As far as I want to go. As far as I want to go. Some get stuck with growing a little bit of Christianity, but still holding on to a little bit of worldliness, if we may take that word sophomore and give it a twist in our meaning. A little bit of Christianity and a little bit of worldliness. Are you stuck? Are you still trying to grow? His name was Alton. He was a friend. And the night of our graduation, as all 11 of us stood at the front of this auditorium, smaller than this room, and the people of the community came by and smiled and congratulated us one by one, to the point that our cheeks got tired of smiling and our hands got tired of shaking. I remember what Alton said. I don't ever have to go to school anymore. But he did. Even if it was the University of Hard Knocks, he still had a lot to learn. And so he did. But Christians get stuck. I don't know whether it's because they decide they don't need to grow anymore. They decide they know enough already. They decide they're doing enough already. They're deciding that maybe being a little bit more like Jesus isn't for me. I don't know what happens. But sometimes Christians get stuck. And this lesson today is for those people who don't want to get stuck their sophomore year of Christianity with a little bit of Christ and a little bit of the Word, but who want to move beyond that, walking more and more in the light, living more and more like Jesus, being more and more pleased with the spiritual woman who looks back at you in the mirror, the spiritual man who looks back at you in the mirror. Try it sometimes. Look in the mirror for the spiritual person that needs to be there. The lesson's yours. That brings us back to this picture. The parable of the sower. What kind of soil am I? We're going to stand and sing the hymn of invitation. And my invitation for you is simply this. Decide to keep growing spiritually.